It's Tuesday, 5th of May, 2026. Welcome back to your news update on Blip Brief, crisp, but almost everything updated every market trading day.
Right, let's jump straight in.
Yeah, you woke up today to a completely redrawn political map here in India. And simultaneously, we've got this massive, this escalation in the Middle East threatening the global supply chains that keep our entire economy moving.
It is a radically altered landscape from what we were looking at just 24 hours ago.
Exactly. And right in the middle of this, corporate earnings are telling two completely contrasting stories about the health of the Indian consumer. So the goal today for this deep dive is to connect these seemingly completely disparate dots for you.
Right, so you know exactly what is driving the markets and the macroeconomy as you head into the office today.
Let's start with the political shifts, because overnight, the calculus for institutional capital has just fundamentally altered.
It really has. I mean, the BJP has pulled off a historic sweep in West Bengal. That brings a definitive end to a very long-standing incumbent rule there.
While simultaneously securing another term in Assam.
Exactly. And meanwhile, the southern political chessboard has basically been flipped on its head.
Oh, completely. The actor-turned-politician Vijay's TVK has stunned the establishment, unseating the ruling DMK in Tamil Nadu.
And over in Kerala, the Congress-led UDF has swept to power. So we are looking at a seismic realignment of state-level power structures across the board.
And the broader market reaction to this is what really catches your eye, right? Because Indian benchmark indices, so both the Sensex and the Nifty, they actually ended the session higher by roughly 0.5%.
They did. But, you know, if you look under the hood, the specific sector and regional allocations are where the real story is.
Yeah, because shares of companies headquartered in West Bengal just rallied significantly across the board.
Right.
It kind of feels like watching a high-stakes hostile takeover in the corporate world, where a massive new management team is stepping into the East and the broader market is just celebrating the acquisition.
Well, capital loves alignment. And what you are seeing here is the market pricing in the double engine theory.
We hear that phrase thrown around a lot.
We do, but let's look at the mechanics of what it actually means for a business operating in a historically complex state like West Bengal. When you have the same political administration at the center in New Delhi and at the state level, the market anticipates a dramatic reduction in bureaucratic friction.
Right, so less red tape.
Exactly. Think about a massive infrastructure project, like, say, a dedicated freight corridor.
Okay.
Previously, central funding might be approved, but the project would just stall for years at the state level over land acquisition hurdles or local environmental clearances due to political gridlock.
Because the state and center weren't aligned.
Right. By aligning the two governments, institutional investors expect those roadblocks to just vanish. It fast-tracks logistics, infrastructure, broader economic reforms.
So that premium you see in West Bengal headquartered stocks today is essentially a frictionless operation premium.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
But the market is ruthless in picking winners and losers in these shifts. I mean, a hostile takeover doesn't benefit everyone. Look at Sun TV, for example.
Right, yeah.
We saw their shares slide by over 5% almost immediately.
Now, the Sun TV slide is basically the inverse of that double engine premium. It is the immediate pricing in of political risk.
Because of their ties to the DMK.
Exactly. That network is inextricably linked to the political fortunes of the DMK in Tamil Nadu, with deep historical ties to that ousted ruling party.
So when TVK unseated the DMK,
the structural advantages and the perceived political patronage that Sun TV enjoyed effectively evaporated overnight. And, institutional investors don't wait for the quarterly earnings to reflect that reality.
They discount the valuation the second the election results are clear.
Precisely.
Let me push back on this narrative of broad market optimism, though, because there's a glaring contradiction in the institutional data right now.
Okay, what do you see?
Well, if the market is celebrating this newfound stability and this growth potential, why have retail investors actually pulled back their direct equity bets for the third straight quarter?
Ah, right.
I mean, at the same time, mutual fund holdings have surged to new historic highs. If the retail investor, the person listening to us on their commute right now, is confident in this political stability, why retreat from direct trading?
Well, the premise there assumes that moving to mutual funds is a retreat from the market. But the data actually suggests it is a maturation of the retail investor.
Maturation how? Like they're getting smarter about risk.
We are seeing a major psychological evolution. Look, the retail investor who was aggressively day trading small cap stocks a few years ago has looked at the sheer complexity of the current market.
The rapid sector rotations, the sudden political shifts we just talked about.
Exactly, plus all the unpredictable global headwinds. And they've realized the risk profile is just too steep to manage on a smartphone app during a lunch break. They aren't leaving the casino, so to speak. They are just deciding to hire a professional to manage their chips.
So channeling their capital through systematic investment plans.
Yes. They are essentially outsourcing the risk management to domestic institutional experts. It provides a safety net against direct market volatility, which explains why domestic institutional ownership is climbing to all-time peaks.
Well, that domestic safety net is going to be tested immediately because while local political certainty is propping markets up, the global environment is deteriorating rapidly.
It really is.
Any domestic victory is ultimately at the mercy of global supply chains.
Yeah.
And over the last 24 hours, the situation in the Middle East has just escalated dramatically.
The global headwinds have intensified, without a doubt. The month-long ceasefire in the Middle East has completely broken down.
Yeah, it's shattered.
And we are now seeing the U.S. and Iran directly trading fire in the Strait of Hormuz, and the collateral damage is already highly visible and highly destructive.
We saw reports that a South Korean commercial vessel was ablaze and a drone strike actually hit a major UAE oil facility.
Right. And the Strait of Hormuz is essentially the global economy's jugular vein.
Any conflict there is like someone firmly pinching India's main economic artery. And the markets reacted violently to this.
They always do at the Strait.
Crude oil prices spiked by roughly 5 to 6%. And consequently, the Indian rupee was absolutely hammered, closing at historic record lows.
Well, the mechanics of that currency drop are entirely tethered to that crude spike. The Strait of Hormuz is a vital choke point. A massive percentage of the world's seaborne oil passes through that narrow corridor.
So when you have military vessels exchanging fire and tankers catching ablaze there, the market prices in catastrophic supply disruptions.
And for an energy-importing nation like India, this is the worst-case scenario. When global crude prices soar, India's import bill inflates instantly.
And to pay that massive oil bill, Indian importers have to aggressively sell rupees and buy U.S. dollars.
Exactly. That sudden, massive demand for dollars crushes the value of the rupee, driving it to those historic lows we just saw.
So if you are driving to work right now listening to this, you might be asking a very logical question.
Right.
If global oil prices are spiking so violently and the rupee is collapsing, why haven't fuel prices skyrocketed at the pump today? Why is the consumer completely isolated from this massive geopolitical shock?
You are isolated at the pump because the government has effectively frozen retail fuel prices. But, in economics, a financial burden doesn't just disappear.
It has to go somewhere.
It gets absorbed by someone else's balance sheet. In this case, it is being transferred directly onto the state-owned oil marketing companies, or OMCs.
And the mechanics are pretty brutal for these businesses right now.
Oh, absolutely. They are forced to purchase crude on the international market at these massively inflated dollar-denominated prices.
Yeah.
But they are strictly prohibited from passing those costs on to you at the petrol station.
Which creates what is known as under-recovery.
Exactly. It severely squeezes their operating margins. The OMCs are essentially acting as massive financial shock absorbers for the broader economy.
Taking the losses so that inflation doesn't just spiral out of control for the average citizen.
Right.
But those shock absorbers only work for direct consumer fuel. The supply chain disruption is bleeding heavily in other foundational sectors, particularly agriculture, which doesn't have that same immediate buffer.
Agriculture is a prime example of how these geopolitical shocks cascade down. I mean, India relies heavily on imported natural gas, specifically liquefied natural gas, or LNG.
And we need that LNG to produce vital fertilizers like urea.
Yes. So with the Middle East conflict disrupting major shipping lanes and driving up natural gas prices globally, the input costs for domestic fertilizer production are skyrocketing.
And the government obviously cannot let the price of fertilizer spike.
No, because that would destroy the margins for farmers and lead to catastrophic food inflation downstream.
So the government has to step in.
Exactly. And because of that, India's fertilizer subsidy is now projected to jump by 20% just to cover that international price difference.
And this exact squeeze on input costs and these global headwinds, it's showing up immediately in India's macroeconomic indicators. And it is creating a fascinating paradox in the Q4 corporate earnings reports we're looking at today.
It really is a paradox.
Let's look at the data. April manufacturing growth has slowed down to a multi-year low. Yet, total GST receipts, so the taxes collected on goods and services, rose by almost 9%.
Right.
Net direct taxes grew by 5%. And if you look at real estate and materials, Godrej Property saw their net profit surge by 70%. And Ambuja Cements saw their profit jump by over 35%.
Well, the manufacturing slowdown is the direct, predictable result of the supply chain chaos we just outlined. Manufacturers are buckling under the weight of increased energy costs, delayed shipments, more expensive raw materials.
But those corporate earnings require a deeper look at the accounting mechanics, don't they? Because they aren't all signaling the same thing.
No, they aren't. Let's take Godrej Properties. They are genuinely riding a massive, unprecedented wave of strong domestic housing demand.
We are seeing sustained premiumization in urban centers.
Yes. Consumers are upgrading their living spaces, driven by rising white-collar incomes that are honestly largely unaffected by the manufacturing slowdown.
But Ambuja Cements jumping by over 35%. That isn't just a pure reflection of this housing boom, is it?
No, it isn't. While Ambuja certainly benefited from the increased demand for construction materials, their massive profit jump was heavily supported by a significant one-time tax credit.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in corporate accounting, a company can sometimes carry forward past losses or realize deferred tax assets. That dramatically reduces their tax liability for a single quarter.
Which artificially inflates their bottom line net profit for that specific report.
Exactly. It makes it look like a historic operational boom when, in reality, it's largely a balance sheet adjustment.
It is a perfect example of why you have to read the footnotes on an earnings report, not just the headline profit number.
Absolutely.
Let's pull back and look at the macro picture this data paints, because to me it looks like a glaring tale of two economies. We have surging tax collections and a booming urban real estate sector.
Right.
But on the flip side, rural job demand just fell by over a third, and manufacturing is hitting that multi-year low. Are we looking at a completely split reality here, where heavy industry and the rural economy struggle against global headwinds, while urban consumption and luxury housing absolutely soar?
The data strongly supports that split reality hypothesis. And, if you want the ultimate undeniable proof of this divergence, you don't look at tax receipts.
What do you look at?
You look at the energy consumption data. You look at what is actually being burned on the ground.
Okay.
Petrol consumption is up by over 5%. That confirms your thesis about urban strength. White-collar commuting, personal vehicle use, urban mobility, it's incredibly strong.
Wow.
However, commercial LPG demand plummeted by 16%.
Wow. A 16% drop in commercial LPG is a massive contraction. Who exactly is using commercial LPG, and what does that drop actually signify?
Commercial LPG is primarily used by MSMEs, micro, small, and medium enterprises. We are talking about local eateries, small-scale fabricators, local bakeries, semi-urban businesses.
That's the mom and pop shops.
Exactly. When that specific fuel demand drops by 16%, it tells you mechanically that the bottom of the economic pyramid is folding under the pressure of inflation and operating costs.
Because these small businesses cannot pass their increased costs onto their price-sensitive customers.
Right, so they are forced to scale back operations or just shut down entirely. This perfectly mirrors the drop in rural job demand.
So your assessment is spot on. The top end of the economy is buying premium real estate and driving up petrol demand, while the bottom end is pulling back on basic commercial operations and seeking less employment.
It's a very stark divide.
So while terrestrial industries, manufacturing, local eateries, agriculture are fighting over earthly constraints like energy costs, shipping bottlenecks, and volatile fuel prices, the tech sector has essentially decided to bypass Earth entirely.
They really have.
Let's pivot from the heavy industry constraints to what is happening in the space economy today, because this is wild.
This is arguably the most transformative infrastructure development we have seen in the tech sector this decade. Indian space tech startup Pixel and the AI company Sarvam have officially joined forces.
To do what?
To launch India's first orbital data center satellite.
Just to be completely clear here, we are talking about literally putting server farms into space.
We are putting the core physical infrastructure of artificial intelligence into orbit.
That sounds like science fiction.
It does, but to understand why this is a necessary leap, you have to look at the fundamental constraints of AI processing down here on Earth.
Got it.
Advanced AI models require astronomical amounts of computing power, which means building gigantic server farms on land. These terrestrial data centers consume horrifying amounts of electricity.
Just to run the processors.
Yes, but not only do they need massive energy to run the actual processors, they require just as much energy to constantly cool the servers down so they don't literally melt.
Right. The heat generation is insane.
Exactly. These server farms are currently straining national energy grids and fighting for prime real estate and water resources for cooling systems.
Okay, so by putting the data center in orbit, you bypass the real estate and the power grid issues entirely.
Yeah.
Because in space, the ambient temperature is near absolute zero, which completely solves the cooling problem.
Precisely. You don't need millions of gallons of water or massive air conditioning units.
Plus, you have access to uninterrupted, intense solar energy up there.
Exactly.
But here's the mechanical issue that immediately comes to my mind. If the servers are in space, processing all this AI data, how do we get the data back and forth between Earth and the satellite without crippling latency?
That's the big question.
Right, I mean, doesn't the sheer distance defeat the purpose of high-speed AI processing?
Well, that is the exact engineering hurdle they had to solve, and the answer is optical data relay, or laser communications.
Lasers.
Yes. Instead of relying on traditional slow radio waves to transmit data, these orbital data centers use highly targeted lasers to beam massive packets of information down to terrestrial receivers.
Oh, wow.
Because light travels incredibly fast and these lasers can carry vastly more bandwidth than radio frequencies, you can beam the data up, process it using the limitless cold and solar power of space, and beam the insights back down at the speed of light with virtually no interference.
It essentially eliminates the latency problem.
It completely bypasses it.
That is genuinely staggering. Which leaves you with a fairly provocative thought as we wrap up today's deep dive. We spend all our time analyzing terrestrial politics, who governs which state, who controls which shipping lane, who taxes which corporation. But what happens when the very infrastructure of our digital minds, the massive AI brains we increasingly rely on to run everything from finance to logistics, no longer physically resides on our planet? Who governs the data, the security, and the processing power when it's operating in the vacuum of international space? As terrestrial resources become scarcer and more expensive, the companies that control the orbital infrastructure might wield more power than the terrestrial governments trying to regulate them. Something to think about as you watch the space race shift from exploration to pure commercial infrastructure. And just before you go, a quick note. This deep dive commentary was put together using advanced AI. We always strive for accuracy, but please do cross-verify any crucial information yourself. Your informed decisions are what matter most. The content shared here is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be treated as investment or trading advice. Past performance is not indicative of future returns. We are not licensed financial advisors,